My first paranormal experience follows closely behind a time in my life that was quite low for me. I was in an abusive relationship, one I should have left a long time ago, as many others have said themselves. It was at this time that we had a tiny argument, one over Chinese food in fact. Such a needless debate that heated his rage. Our argument ended with his hand around my throat and me dangling against a wall, eyes bulging out, gasping for mere specks of air. Any air, really. I'd grabbed a nearby object and hit him against the head just before I lost all consciousness. I was able to get away and call for help, and police arrived and took him to jail. While he was away, I packed my things and called my friend. My friend drove 500 miles to me. He's the type of friend some will never see in their lives. He dropped everything to come and help me. For a while, I stayed with my friend and his fiancée. They had just moved into a 3-bedroom apartment and were entirely welcoming for me to stay until I could get my life sorted out. A venture that was supposed to be a month, maybe 2, ended up being nearly 6 when shortly after I'd arrived, I started becoming ill. At first, it was throwing up, so I assumed I had contracted the flu. Then fatigue began, which again was a sign of the flu, so I rolled with it. Then at times, I was unable to move due to the extreme pain. That's when I finally went to the doctor and realized things were a bit more serious than just the flu. My friend's fiancée was amazing. Since at the time she did not work, she and I were able to bond a lot. She would take care of me while he was at his job, and we'd play games and watch television together. A few days before my gallbladder surgery, I was home alone watching television on the couch in quite a bit of pain. I started to feel the air get heavier and the feeling of being watched. After all, it was 9 p.m., and I was watching a scary movie by myself, so I just assumed I was creeping myself out. Unable to pass off the feeling after a few minutes, I slowly got off the couch to get a glass of water from the kitchen. I rounded the left side of the couch, holding my side as waves of pain came and went, and observing my footing so I wouldn't trip. When I finally raised my eyes, I noticed the shadow figure in the kitchen about 10 feet in front of me. I blinked my eyes multiple times, thinking I was hallucinating from the pain. The shadow wasn't very big, maybe 3 feet in size, but as I gazed at it, it began to grow and get larger. Once it was about 7 feet tall, it stopped growing. Then it seemed to start slithering towards me, slowly but intently. I began to back away from the arm of the couch, blindly backward, praying for nothing to be in my path. I studied the thing. Where its eyes should have been, there were mere hollows. It did not have hands, but fuzzy, claw-like things. Then the voice came. Not an audible voice, mind you. One that was only in my head. Leave. I'd finally backed into something at the exact moment and threw my arms out to catch myself from falling into the coffee table. When I looked back up, the creature or entity, whatever you want to call it, was gone. For a while, I stood there frozen in shock, wondering if whatever it was would come back to terrorize me. Then minutes passed, and nothing came. So finally, I sunk my body back down onto the couch and tried to reason with myself if what I just saw had actually happened. There was no way something like this was possible, but I was sure it had happened. 5 minutes into my couch thoughts, the front door opened and my roommate's fiancée came in. She called to me, and I did the best I could do to act completely fine, minus the pain in my body. About an hour later, my friend arrived home from work. His fiancée and I were on the couch talking about our day and just life in general. When he walked in, I got this overwhelming feeling of something being off. I couldn't place it. I still can't quite describe it. It wasn't hate, nor was it dread, but it was just a negative feeling. They both went back to their bedroom to get ready for bed, and I slowly plucked myself from the couch and headed towards the guest room. As I'm walking down the hallway, I'm overhearing an argument. They're fighting in their room behind the closed door. I walk slower in an attempt to slightly overhear, but also to tighten my footfalls so they don't know I'm right outside in the hallway. Suddenly, as I'm about to pass it, my friend's bedroom door flies open, and he comes out looking miffed. I mean, he's maybe a foot away from me. I looked at the ground when I heard the door swing open in an attempt to fake that I hadn't overheard anything. When I finally do get the nerve to look up and back over my shoulder as I reach my room, he is looking over his own shoulder back at me, with this extreme hatred on his face. I was shocked. Had their argument been about me? Then my gaze fell just behind him to the black thing behind him. That shadow demon thing was right behind him, with its claw-like black hands on each shoulder, like it was getting a piggyback from him. I stumbled backward into the wall, gained my composure, and ran into the guest bedroom and shut the door. I backed up to the bed with my mind racing a million thoughts. Mostly, what the hell had I just seen? In my entire life, I have never seen anything like that before. It was terrifying. I would be lying if I said I slept well that night. I absolutely did not. I spent the night on my cell phone Googling what the heck I'd just witnessed. To most of my research, it seemed like it was possibly a shadow demon of some sort trying to influence my friend or take him over. At the time, I was a skeptic and was a little unsure if I could believe such things. But with my surgery only a few days away, I was worried this evil thing would latch on to me and follow me into the operating room, and who knew what could happen. So many things had happened in this place that I could not wrap my mind around, and I wasn't willing to take any chances. Despite being on mostly bed rest until surgery, I went for a walk the next day. I found a couple of shops that sold sage and bought some. I waited for both of them to be out of the house, and I did it. I blessed their house without permission. I figured they would thank me later. As things did not happen every day, I was not sure how well it had worked until the night before my surgery. I had gone to bed fairly early because I wanted to give my body as much rest as possible as it would need to heal soon. I had been asleep for about 20 minutes or so when I heard a scratching noise, and I woke. My eyes searched the darkness and saw nothing, so I rolled over to face the window to go back to sleep. The moment I did that, I heard the scratching again, directly in front of me at the window. I blinked my eyes and lay there for a moment, gathering my courage, then raised myself up on my elbows and peered out the window. Just outside the window was the shadow demon, the mass of black I'd seen before, its empty sockets, watching me. Part of me was terrified. It was right there, waiting. The rational part finally kicked in, and I realized I must have expelled it with the sage. I had cleared the house. The next morning was my surgery, and since I'm telling you about all of this, I'm sure you can tell it went just fine. I'm no longer in pain, although out one appendage. Such is the luck of life, I guess. Our bodies are loners, and sometimes parts fail. My life is much better these days, and no, I'm not living with my friend anymore. In fact, I was pretty dead set on moving out within a few weeks of my surgery, and moved in with my mom for a few months until I gained my strength back. When you lose your gallbladder, unfortunately, there are some life changes that occur. Some minor and some not quite as minor. It's an adjustment. I'm happy where I am at in my life now, and somewhat blessed that I got to experience that place, however terrifying it was. It opened my eyes to the world, and I realized things are not as simple as we sometimes would like to believe. Recently, my mom and I moved to an apartment complex together. Being 25 years old, I had hoped to be on my own at this point. Still, due to financial hardship on both our parts, we figured that it would be best for both of us to share living expenses instead of hoping to find a roommate that would be trustworthy enough to pay their share every month. When we did a tour of the place, we both thought we would be happy living there. Even the rent was going to be on the lower end of the price range, which we thought we could afford. It would be a bit of a longer drive to work, but the savings were more than enough to make up for the extra cost of gas. It didn't take a week before things started getting weird. It started with things going missing, only to appear in places that made no sense for them to be. One particular example was when I found my cell phone in the oven. I blamed my boyfriend for doing this, and even after he adamantly denied it, I still accused him of lying to me since there was no one else there. This dissolved into an ugly fight that left us not speaking to each other for nearly a week. Other strange things seemed to plague my mom and me during the first month of living there, too. I had never experienced night terrors before, but they seemed to come out of nowhere almost from the day we moved in. I would wake up to my mom trying to hold me down on the bed because I would thrash about and more than once had hurt myself. There were also cold spots that would appear throughout our place from time to time. The thing that scared me the most, though, happened to me just a few days ago. Frankly, I don't want to be here any longer because I don't think that I'll ever feel comfortable again. I had woken up really early one morning. Stress from the constant experiences had taken its toll, and I never slept an entire night through. I decided to take a shower, hoping that the hot water would help relieve the headache that was starting to build behind my eyes. I grabbed my bathrobe and walked into the bathroom. Walking into the room, I immediately felt something was wrong. but this was a constant these days, so I had gotten used to brushing it off. I closed and locked the door, trying to curtail the building anxiety. I undressed quickly and got into the shower. The hot water felt good, but did little to calm my mind or increasingly frayed nerves. I was contemplating getting out and running a bath, hoping a soak in the tub might do the trick, when through the curtain I noticed a large shadow standing in the doorway to the bathroom. The door was still shut, and I know that I had locked it, plus I hadn't heard anyone come into the room while I was in it. My boyfriend was staying over that night, but the shadow was way too tall for it to be him or my mom. The water cascading over me suddenly got really cold, stealing the breath from me. I wanted to get out to escape the cold water, but I was more afraid of who or what the shadow was on the other side of the curtain. I sat there, staring at it for about 30 seconds, before the humanoid figure just seemed to vanish. It was like I blinked, and it was gone, as if I had just imagined the entire thing. I could have thought that I was only dreaming, but the likelihood that I could have imagined the cold water, the figure, and waking up seemed pretty remote to me. I had considered it a possibility that the apartment was haunted already. There were too many signs that I had heard of before that pointed to this being the explanation for all of our troubles, but this was the first time I had seen anything remotely resembling a spirit. After the spirit left, the water almost immediately got hot again. The quick change of temperature made it feel hot enough to burn, forcing me out of the shower. I quickly dried off and pulled the robe around me before I ran to my mom's room to tell her what I had seen. To her credit, even though it's still early in the morning, and I'm sure I sounded crazed at the time, she took what I said in stride. Not a stranger to the supernatural herself, she didn't question what I said, which felt better than I can tell you. The next day, we went and got some sage in order to purify the apartment, but as of yet, I still get the feeling something remains there with us. I'm not opposed to spirits being around, as long as they don't mean us any harm or are trying to scare us, but whatever is there doesn't feel like it means us no harm. I fear we may have to move soon if I don't find some way of removing this presence from our home. I grew up in an old house that my family had shared since the early 70s. Although it was slightly aged, it had its charm. One of my fondest memories as a kid was playing in the backyard that bordered some woods and flying kites in the sky. I just loved to collect all sorts of kites and run the endless span of our yard and fly them as high as I could. When I was 8, I stopped collecting and flying kites. I also quit playing outside as much. I saw something come out of the woods that I could not explain, and it terrified me. One afternoon, my mom had a friend over, and they were hanging out in the kitchen sharing some tea. She'd waved me off and told me to go play outside and get some energy out. I'd plucked one of my kites out of my closet and went into the backyard to try my luck on the almost windless sky. I did get her up in the air. She was shaky and not as high as I was hoping for, but she was up. So I started trotting, hoping that would help get her up a little higher. I caught a glimpse of the sun as a passing cloud moved, and I squinted and trained my vision on the woods in front of me. And that's when I let go of the kite and stared. My vision was still off from the sun's glare, so I was doing my best to try to focus on the trees a little way off in the distance. There was an old man with an upwards curled mustache and a pudgy belly, wearing a vested shirt and some trousers that I knew were not from this era. At first, it appeared that he looked directly at me, then he started walking towards a group of trees a few feet in front of him. His pace was stiff, almost like a VHS tape skipping slightly. Then once he neared the group of limbs, he just faded into nothing. For a moment, I just stood there with a gaping mouth and rapidly blinking eyes. I could not believe what I had just seen. Suddenly, I was reminded of my kite and that I had let go. I peered back up at the sky in search of it when a thunk sounded behind me. I jumped at the noise due to what I had just seen near the woods and turned around cautiously. My kite lay on the ground, unscathed. At that point, I made the decision to go back inside and play in my room for the rest of the time that my mom was having her friend over for. I never mentioned this sighting to anyone in my family, mostly because I was afraid they would think I was crazy, and I highly wondered if I had imagined after looking briefly but directly at the sun. Over the next few months, I had nothing unusual happen until one night my father was out of town and my brother was at his friend's house spending the night. My mom and I were having dinner in the kitchen when there was a scraping sound on the kitchen window. We had a cat at the time, so we assumed the noise was Bella announcing she wanted to be let in. My mother got up from the table to go to the back door when she just suddenly stopped mid-step. I put my fork down and my eyes followed where she was staring. In the kitchen window was the face of an older woman, but not one from this time period. She looked like she was from the early 1900s. My mom gazed over her shoulder at me, and I'm sure I looked absolutely terrified. All I could do was shrug, because words just would not come to my lips. She turned back around to the window, and again so did mine, but the lady was gone. Hesitantly, my mom went to the back door to check for the cat, but she was not there. Can I explain the people that I saw at my childhood home? No. But I do know the house used to be where a house burned down in the early 1900s. I do not have any photos of the owners, only heard that at some point a house was there that burned to the ground tragically. Was anyone harmed? Again, not sure. But I think that some people that inhabited this spot of land before our house was built on it remain there.